Readers love the cozy familiarity of fairy tales and the promise of happily ever after in their fiction, but they also love seeing those sentimental once upon a times completely reimagined. So how do you balance reader expectations while pulling your audience along in a plot that won't be spoiled before they even read the first page? Because face it, we all know that Cinderella's slipper is gonna fit in the end. So come and learn how to honor the universal allure of classic fairy tales and set your retelling in a thriving genre market while creating an unputdownable new novel for fairy tale readers. So really quickly about me and why I'm the one here teaching you all about how to write refreshing fairy tale retellings. I'm Rachel Huffmire, and I'm an award-winning author who specializes in writing futuristic fairy tale retellings with twisty plots and happily ever afters. I believe that there's courage and compassion, and I write about optimistic rebels who just change the world. I currently live in Southern California with my husband, 3 children, and a library full of books that is slowly overtaking our house. But it's not my fault, I promise. When I'm not writing, I enjoy baking apple pastries, taking really long naps, and wearing warm cardigans. Now, as for my experience in the field, I've had 5 of my fairy tale retellings published, both by small presses and as an indie publisher. I have written and sold feature-length screenplays, I've edited television series, and I've collaborated with incredible professionals in the film and theater industry on a lot of projects that also revolve around retelling and adapting classic stories. I've also worked in the book and publishing industry since 2007, where I managed a bookstore, I edited manuscripts, worked for publishers, directed a marketing department for a small press, so yeah, fairy tales are kind of an obsession along with publishing, but it's also a lot of the reason why I've found success in the writing industry. So I am really passionate about talking about them. For our first point today, I wanted to zoom in on one of the questions I often hear from fairy tale writers. Sometimes I hear authors worry that they're retelling something that's already been told a million times. I recently taught at a conference, and this is a graph of all the fairy tales that were submitted. There were a few fan favorites, and they're all recognizable titles, which is great because that means there are tons of readers who are familiar with them and dying to get their hands on them. For example, how many of you have read more than one retelling of the same fairy tale, right? It doesn't bother us. In fact, we love it. But also look at how many unique retellings we had. So before we start, I want you to know that every story in the world has already been told, but it hasn't been told by you. And that's why you should write exactly what you have your heart set on, because we need your voice. We need your unique perspective on the world. And I personally can't wait to hear it. Next at this conference, I asked what genre people were writing in. So here is the word cloud with the most common answers. This is just another example of why 2 people can retell the same story, but it's going to look totally different. And that's the amazing thing about publishing, is there really isn't such a thing as scarcity economics, which is just a fancy way of saying people don't just buy one book and then never shop again. They're constantly looking for that same feeling over and over. So if you can help pass around readers, your readers will benefit. We aren't each other's competition, we're actually each other's champions and cheerleaders. So now that I have you convinced to go after that retelling you've always wanted to write, let's take a second to talk about how powerful the fairy tale genre really is. Fairy tales often contain positive messages and beliefs that can inspire readers. That's why they're classics, right? They've had an impact on our lives since we were babies. So I want some thoughts from you. Drop a comment if you have one. What are some common positive messages found in fairy tales? I'll give you an example. I think that fairy tales taught me kindness and empathy. For example, in Snow White and Rose Red, I learned a lot from the 2 girls taking compassion on a grumpy little dwarf with a tangled beard, and they kept freeing him from various precarious situations, and he was so ungrateful. Another one was hope and resilience. Fairy tales often feature characters who overcome challenges and adversity. This really taught me the importance of hope and resilience, even in the face of difficulty. Perseverance. Fairy tales often involve characters who have to persevere to reach their goals. Courage. Many fairy tales feature characters who stand up, whether it's to a bully or a dangerous creature. kindness and empathy. Fairy tales often feature characters who are really, really empathetic, even to those who might mistreat them. This can teach us the importance of treating everybody with kindness and empathy no matter what. Imagination and creativity. Fairy tales are set in fantastical worlds with magical creatures and events. Overall, these are important lessons and values that we can use to inspire readers in their own lives. But there are always two sides to a coin, right? Traditional fairy tales can also contain negative messages for various reasons. Can you think of any problems with messages that could be taken from some classical fairy tales? Again, feel free to comment. Here are a few that I came up with. Gender stereotypes. Often there's the idea that girls should be passive and boys should be strong and brave and assertive, instead of everyone seeking their own humanity. Beauty standards. Fairy tales often perpetuate the idea that physical beauty is the most important quality for women and that women who are not beautiful are less valuable. Violence. Fairy tales often have some really disturbing imagery that might be traumatizing for young readers. Some fairy tales just straight up teach false or harmful lessons, such as the idea that it's acceptable to lie, cheat, or harm others in order to get what you want. We're looking at you, Jack and the Beanstalk. This is where the power of retellings comes in. It's really important to recognize these benefits and these negatives and work to reimagine the fairy tales in a way that's more inclusive or empowering or just reflective of healthy values. So, why are we spending any time focusing on messaging in fairy tales? Well, I have a few reasons. First, there's neurology, thesis, and parable. The first I want to cover is thesis. Did you know that fiction is actually the most effective form of persuasive writing in the world? That's because readers come with an open mind to new perspectives. That's their goal in opening a book. They want to escape what they already know and see the world through a brand new filter. How much more effective is that than debate, where people come prepared with data and positions and they argue and they're determined to prove their point? The effectiveness of persuasion really depends on the heart of the person. And when you get a reader, you are getting someone that is primed and open to hearing your thesis. In novels, thesis actually has a different word that you might be more familiar with. It's theme. So what's the theme of your novel? Your theme is something that you believe in so deeply that it's going to come across through the entire story. You introduce the theme in the beginning, and then the following chapters are your evidence of the thesis. Second is neurology. So why is it important to consider these themes? I attended a class on writing in the brain a few years ago, and they taught me something incredible. In this study, there were two groups of people. The first group was told to sit in a chair, close their eyes, and visualize themselves perfecting the perfect tennis swing. So for 1 hour, they sat and did just that. The second group was given a tennis racket and put out on a court and said, for 1 hour, practice the perfect tennis swing. At the end of the study, they did a brain scan to see how many new neurons had developed in that hour. And what they found was shocking. Group 1 had developed 70% as many new neurons as the group that actually went out and practiced. I've since found tons of replicated studies, pianists, football players. There are so many examples proving that imagination and visualization are at 70% as effective as actually living something. Think about that. Reading is 70% as good as living the real thing. But I would argue it's even better because books have a resolution. Sometimes the struggles or problems in our lives take years to resolve. We might be stuck in the middle of a conflict in our lives that we cannot see the end of. But in a book, we follow the character through the entire arc. It helps us experience that feeling of resolution and healing. And that can translate to giving readers hope and the tools they need to achieve their own happily ever afters in real life. Now, third is parable. Christ taught in parables because he understood the power of storytelling. How many of you have read a book that you probably don't remember much of the plot, but you remember the way you felt when you read it? You might have warm feelings towards a book or its characters, but if you reread it, you'd be like, whoa, I do not remember that at all. Parables portray theme in a relatable way, and even when the plot fades, those feelings, those internalized impressions, those are going to stick with your reader. So parables bring theme to a level that's actually understandable, engaging, and doesn't feel preachy. So why do I dive into all of this? Because you have a lot of power in your hands. You have the potential to change people's lives in a way that they may not even realize. And I want you to be deliberate with it. I want you to know exactly what you're doing with your power. You've already got the power in your hands. Now you've got to train it to spread the messages that you know are going to change the world. So here is your assignment. First, think of a fairy tale that you are dying to retell and write it down. 2, decide what genre you would like to set this fairy tale in. 3, go find the original source of a retelling, read it, study it, get to know it really, really well. 4, write down the positive and negative messages that come through in this fairy tale. What do you want to keep and hold on to? And what do you need to reframe and restructure, because this is a retelling. That's the whole purpose. And finally, I want you to think of the theme that would work the best in this fairy tale. What is that message that you believe in so strongly that it would come across throughout the whole story? What is that message that you wish you could share with the world that you think would make the world a better place? Write it down and put it in that fairy tale. All right. Now you hopefully have an understanding of why fairy tales are some of the most powerful stories in the world and how you can utilize them to write a story that readers are immediately going to be in love with, that's going to reframe those things that may have been harmful, and that is going to be completely you wrapped up in a beautiful package. I'm so excited to see what you create.